Geoffrey Chaucer. Life and work. Born circa 1343 in London to a prosperous family of wine merchants. Began his official duties as page to the Countess of Ulster, the wife of Lionel, second son to the King Edward III. Widely considered the greatest English poet of the Middle Ages, he is best known for the Canterbury Tales. He has been called the father of English literature, or alternatively, the father of English poetry. Among Chaucer's many other works are The Book of the Duchess, The House of Fame, The Legend of Good Women, and Troilus and Cresside. Since Chaucer was a public servant, his official life is very well documented. Chaucer was a close friend of John of Gaunt, the wealthy Duke of Lancaster and father of Henry IV, and he served under Lancaster's patronage. Chaucer died of unknown causes on 25 October 1400. Chaucer was buried in Westminster Abbey in London. In 1556, his remains were transferred to a more ornate tomb, making him the first writer interred in the area now known as Poets' Corner. Chaucer's first major work was The Book of the Duchess, an elegy for Blanche of Lancaster, who died in 1368. Two other early works were Annalida and Arcite, and The House of Fame. His Parliament of Fowls, The Legend of Good Women, and Troilus and Cresside all date from 1374 to 1386. It is believed that he started the Canterbury Tales in the 1380s. Chaucer also translated Boethius's Consolation of Philosophy and The Romance of the Rose by Guillaume de Loris, extended by Jean de Meun. Chaucer's treatise on the astrolabe describes the form and use of the astrolabe in detail. Chaucer wrote in continental accentual syllabic meter. He was one of the first English poets to use the five-stress line. The poetry of Chaucer, along with other writers of the era, is credited with helping to standardize the London dialect of the Middle English language from a combination of the Kentish and Midlands dialects. Early criticism. The poet Thomas Hoccleve, who may have met Chaucer and considered him his role model, hailed Chaucer as the first finder of our fair language. John Lydgate referred to Chaucer within his own text The Fall of Princes as the Lodestar of our language. Around 2 centuries later, Sir Philip Sidney greatly praised Troilus and Cresside in his own Defence of Poesy. Major works. Translation of Roman de la Rose, possibly extant as The Romaunt of the Rose, The Book of the Duchess, The House of Fame, Annalida and Arcite, Parliament of Fowls, translation of Boethius's Consolation of Philosophy as Boys, Troilus and Cresside, The Legend of Good Women, The Canterbury Tales, a treatise on the astrolabe. The Canterbury Tales. The Canterbury Tales is a collection of 24 stories that runs to over 17,000 lines, written in Middle English by Geoffrey Chaucer between 1387 and 1400. The tales are presented as part of a storytelling contest by a group of pilgrims as they travel together from London to Canterbury to visit the shrine of St. Thomas Becket at Canterbury Cathedral. The prize for this contest is a free meal at the Tabard Inn at Southwark on their return. The Canterbury Tales is near unanimously seen as Chaucer's magnum opus. He uses the tales and descriptions of its characters to paint an ironic and critical portrait of English society at the time and particularly of the Church. Structurally, the collection resembles Boccaccio's Decameron. The Canterbury Tales is generally thought to have been incomplete at the end of Chaucer's life. In the general prologue, some 30 pilgrims are introduced. According to the prologue, Chaucer's intention was to write 4 stories from the perspective of each pilgrim, 2 each on the way to and from their ultimate destination, St. Thomas Becket's shrine, making for a total of about 120 stories. Chaucer wrote in a London dialect of late Middle English. Chaucer pronounced E at the end of many words, so that care was care, not care, as in modern English. The word night was night, with both the K and the GH pronounced, not night. In some cases, vowel letters in Middle English were pronounced very differently from modern English because the great vowel shift had not yet happened. Historical context and theme. The Canterbury Tales was written during a turbulent time in English history. The Catholic Church was in the midst of the Western Schism and was the subject of heavy controversy. Lollardy, an early English religious movement led by John Wycliffe, is mentioned in the tales. The Canterbury Tales is among the first English literary works to mention paper, a relatively new invention. After analysis of Chaucer's diction and historical context, his work appears to develop a critique of society during his lifetime. It appears that Chaucer creates fictional characters to be general representations of people. Religion. The tales reflect diverse views of the Church in Chaucer's England. Several characters in the tales are religious figures, and the very setting of the pilgrimage to Canterbury is religious, making religion a significant theme of the work. 2 characters, the pardoner and the summoner, whose roles apply the Church's secular power, are both portrayed as deeply corrupt, greedy, and abusive. In the Friar's Tale, one of the characters is a summoner who is shown to be working on the side of the devil, not God. Churchmen of various kinds are represented by the monk, the prioress, the nun's priest, and the second nun. Pilgrimage was a very prominent feature of medieval society. The pilgrimage in the work ties all of the stories together and may be considered a representation of Christians striving for heaven despite weakness, disagreement, and diversity of opinion. Social class and convention. The upper class or nobility, represented chiefly by the knight and his squire, was in Chaucer's time steeped in a culture of chivalry and courtliness. 2 tales, Sir Topas and the Tale of Melibea, are told by Chaucer himself, who is travelling with the pilgrims in his own story. The tales constantly reflect the conflict between classes. The division of the 3 estates, the characters are all divided into 3 distinct classes, the classes being those who pray, the clergy, those who fight, the nobility, and those who work, the commoners and peasantry. General Prologue. The frame story of the poem, as set out in the 858 lines of Middle English, which make up the general prologue, is of a religious pilgrimage. The narrator, Geoffrey Chaucer, is in the Tabard Inn in Southwark, where he meets a group of sundry folk who are all on the way to Canterbury, the site of the shrine of St. Thomas Becket, a martyr reputed to have the power of healing the sinful. The setting is April, and the prologue starts by singing the praises of that month whose rains and warm western wind restore life and fertility to the earth and its inhabitants. This abundance of life, the narrator says, prompts people to go on pilgrimages in England. The goal of such pilgrimages is the shrine of Thomas Becket. The narrator falls in with a group of pilgrims, and the largest part of the prologue is taken up by a description of them. The pilgrims include a knight, his son a squire, the knight's yeoman, a prioress accompanied by a second nun and the nun's priest, a monk, a friar, a merchant, a clerk, a sergeant of law, a franklin, a haberdasher, a carpenter, a weaver, a dyer, a tapestry weaver, a cook, a shipman, a doctor of physic, a wife of Bath, a parson, his brother a ploughman, a miller, a manciple, a reeve, a summoner, a pardoner, the host, a man called Harry Bailey, and the portrait of Chaucer himself. At the end of the section, the host proposes that the group ride together and entertain one another with stories. He lays out his plan. Each pilgrim will tell 2 stories on the way to Canterbury and 2 on the way back. Whoever has told the most meaningful and comforting stories with the best sentence and the most soulas will receive a free meal paid for by the rest of the pilgrims upon their return. The company agrees and makes the host its governor, judge, and record keeper. They set off the next morning and draw lots to determine who will tell the first tale. The knight wins and prepares to tell his tale. The tales. We will not discuss the tales as they are not included in the syllabus. The general prologue establishes the frame for the tales as a whole and introduces the characters, storytellers. These are introduced in the order of their rank in accordance with the 3 medieval social estates: clergy, nobility, and commoners and peasantry. These characters are also representative of their estates and models with which the others in the same estate can be compared and contrasted. The structure of the general prologue is also intimately linked with the narrative style of the tales. Some scholars, like William W. Lawrence, claim that the narrator is Geoffrey Chaucer in person, while others, like Marchette Chute, for instance, contest that the narrator is instead a literary creation like the other pilgrims in the tales. John Matthews Manley attempted to identify pilgrims with real 14th century people. In some instances, such as summoner and friar, he attempts localization to a small geographic area. The man of law is identified as Thomas Pinchbeck, also Pinchbeck, who was chief baron of the Exchequer. Sir John Busy was an associate of Pinchbeck. He is identified as the Franklin. The Pembroke estates near Boswell supplied the portrait for the unnamed reeve. Sebastian Sobecki argues that the general prologue, in which the innkeeper and host Harry Bailey introduces each pilgrim, is a pastiche of the historical Harry Bailey's surviving 1381 poll tax account of Southwark's inhabitants. That's all, folks. In the next video, we will discuss Chaucer's art of characterization with special reference to the Canterbury Tales. Till then, study well.